Welcome to News Inside. I'm An Jang-han. Let's welcome back our panelists, Professor Shin Sang-yeop, great to have you back, and Dr. Bong Young-sik. Thanks for joining us again. February 25th marked the third year since President Park Geun-hye took office. So today, we'll be looking back on the past 3 years to examine what some of the main achievements have been and what challenges lie ahead. So let's start with an overall evaluation of the past 3 years. How well has the administration done? On a scale of 1 to 10, what score would you give?
Well, I think it's not easy to answer the question. But as a whole, I want to give about the 8 out of 10.
That's fairly high.
There are two main reasons. The first one is actually considering external economic conditions. I think she did quite a good job. I mean, at least we maintained the dynamism in our economy itself. And then it has been proved by the so-called International Financial Institute assess the economic foundations of national economy. As you know very well, if I introduce one of them, Moody's assessed the Korean economy with a score of A to AA, which is one of the very good status in the world. The second one is, in fact, in terms of the security, I think she did a quite good job. Actually, she kept consistency in her government policy toward North Korea. I think based on these two things, I want to give 8 out of 10.
Okay, what about your score, and Dr. Bong?
Well, I'm stingier than Professor Shin. I would say 7 out of 10. We should not be considered as a low mark because the exam itself has been really difficult for Park Geun-hye administration. And that applies to any other governments in other countries. The year 2012, when the Park Geun-hye, as a presidential candidate, won the election in December, was an interesting year in terms of having many new leaders in many countries, such as Xi Jinping government started, and the Obama administration won the re-election. And Vladimir Putin came back as a president, and Shinzo Abe became the prime minister for the second time. So among those leaders who embarked upon their tenure in late 2012 or 2013, as President Park did, faced the same very tough challenges, like IS challenges in the Middle East for the United States, Russia, and other countries, and the economic difficulties in worldwide. There was not only the trouble for South Korea. So my assessment of the performance of all these leaders who started their tenure in about the same time as the Park Geun-hye administration would have been as low.
Fair enough. Well, let's see whether public opinion reflects the views of our experts in the studio. Here's a look at President Park Geun-hye's job approval rating from recent surveys.
After the first 3 months in office, President Park Geun-hye received an approval rating of 42%, and the average over the course of 3 years stands at 45.9%. In terms of different areas, the Park administration received good scores in foreign relations and diplomacy. But numbers show people want more to be done on revitalizing the economy and enhancing public safety.
Let's go over the key issues one by one, starting with the economy. One of the simplest ways to measure economic performance is through indices and rankings. The current administration seems to have done relatively well in that aspect. Despite North Korea's recent nuclear test and rocket launch, Seoul still maintains strong credit ratings with a positive outlook from all 3 of the world's major rating agencies. Its performance in terms of growth and exports has also improved. So considering all these external economic uncertainties, we seem to be doing all right. How much should we read into these ratings and rankings?
Oh, well, I would like to remind you the promise actually made by and suggested by the President Park Geun-hye when she was a presidential candidate. At the time, she gave us a so-called 474. 4 stands for, means the 4% economic growth, potential economic growth, and 7 means 70% employment rate. And then another 4 means the 40,000 per capita income. Well, comparing with the promise when she gave us as a candidate, her performance over the last 3 years was not enough. But considering, as I said before, the external economic circumstances, I think she did quite a good job. Let me give you more details. Actually, over the last 3 years, the Korean economy has achieved the average 3% economic growth rate. Say again, it is lower than the 4%, but considering the other countries' economic situations, it is quite good job. I think it's quite good job. And then the unemployment rate, still this is one of the hard issues for us. About the under the catchphrase and initiatives of so-called creative economy, the Korean government has committed itself to increase the employment rate, particularly to solve the youth unemployment issues. At least I think the Korean government does its best to reduce the unemployment rate. And in the $40,000 per capita income, actually, I think owing to the good performance in the exports, the Korean per capita income shows the increasing trends. So I think as a whole, this is a kind of achievement made by the Park Geun-hye government over the last 3 years. And then, as I already explained, that according to the international rating agencies, well, Korean economy has been assessed quite well. I think this means what? I think Korean economic fundamentals has been strengthened at least during the Park Geun-hye regime. So I think, say again, she did a quite good job.
Well, despite the positive economic data and indices, some people say they just don't feel the economy is doing well. As a member of the public yourself, Dr. Bong, would you agree with that assessment?
I would agree that there is a huge gap in terms of feeling the success or failure of the Korean national economy under Park Geun-hye administration at the national scale and at the individual levels. As a person who has been busy filing tax for reimbursement, I'm in no good mood to praise Park Geun-hye administration for economic performance. The problem with the Park Geun-hye administration is that it bit more than it can chew. It promised too much, despite the fact that it has also achieved a lot. It has achieved, but it still left a lot of problems unsettled and unresolved because the administration embarked upon extremely expensive and ambitious economic agendas. The problem is that the creative economy was not really clearly defined in the eyes of the public and the critics. So the brunt of the criticism toward the Park Geun-hye administration's economic policy is that at the end of the day, the creative economy, however it can be defined, has failed to create jobs. Creative economy has not created jobs. So now we have a very high rate of youth unemployment, which must be the highest since 1999, still leaves a very sore spot for Park Geun-hye administration when it tries to persuade the public that the national economy has been more or less on the right track.
Yes, it's true. But according to the Bloomberg Global Innovation Index, Korea has been in the first place in the 2014 and 2015. So this means what? This means at least Korean government tried to make some change in the Korean economy itself. So I think we should buy such a kind of efforts made by the Korean government. Of course, in terms of the outcomes, well, as I said before, certainly very short to the promise she made. But I think that under the very difficult conditions, I think at least Korean government tried to make some change.
Well, naturally, there would be a difference between how we're seen from the outside and how we feel on the inside.
Yes.
But what are some of the more pressing economic issues at the moment?
Well, we have to vitalize the Korean economy. In other words, we have to keep the dynamism in our economy. But considering the external circumstances facing Korean economy, it is very difficult for us to have a very positive, bright the prospects. First of all, look at the China, which is the largest trading partner for the Korean economy. Chinese economy has been slowed down very rapidly over the last several years, and then according to the many studies about analyzing Chinese economy, such a kind of trends would continue for a while. That means that Korean economy will face the additional burden, difficulties in the keeping the dynamism in our economy. And the another one, actually, even though our USA economy shows some recovering symptoms, but it's very slow, and the other big economies such as European Union, they are still struggling to overcome the difficulties facing them. So, and then how about the Middle East countries, which has been one of the destinations of Korean the exports because of the low, cheap the oil prices. The purchasing power parity of the Middle East countries has been reduced dramatically, which means that the Korean exports to these countries are expected to be decreased for a while. So considering those kinds of things, it seems to be quite difficult for the Korean government to maintain the dynamism in our economy. So these things seems to be the most difficult task for the Korean economy. Why? Because we have the economic structure which is heavily reliant on the external economic relations. If we cannot make the exports, we will have serious difficulties. So that will be one of the most urgent and the most important tasks for the Korean government, I think.
Well, it is very interesting that because other countries having a big player in international trade failed to perform as well as they used to. Korea as an exporter just raised its rank to number 6 in the world, which is accounted for by what South Korean economy has done well, but at the same time, clear reflection of the downturn in world economy.
Well, obviously, economic policies take time to produce results, but based on what you've seen so far, what are some of the most significant policies that have been put forward by the Park Geun-hye administration?
Well, she has implemented a few the very important economic policies, but among them, the first policy which I wanted to appreciate, as an economist, that is the deregulation policy. Deregulation means to improve the circumstances, business activity, for the business entities, which means that, well, to attract more investment and to have a more successful the business entities in Korea, we have to improve the so-called circumstances. Well, the first obstacle chosen by the businessmen in Korea was the regulations, heavy regulations. So Park Geun-hye government, comparing with the previous government, very aggressively tried to deregulate those kind of rules and the regulations. Well, this can be a kind of the some stepping stone for improvement of the small and medium-sized the enterprises comparative advantages. Well, as we know very well, Korean economy has been led by a few dozens of the business conglomerate. We call them chaebol. But to have the momentum in the Korean economic development, we need contribution of the small and medium-sized enterprises. And the Korean government, Park Geun-hye government, has tried to help those small and medium-sized enterprises have more competitive advantages or competitive edge in the international market. Well, this has been the empathizes in an effort of the so-called creative economy. What is that? Well, among the small and medium-sized companies, if they have creative ideas, the government helps them to realize their idea as a business item or business entity or business policies. So I think these kind of efforts could be appreciated, could be accessed very highly by the many economists, I think.
President Park Geun-hye has consistently received high scores on the diplomatic front, which experts say have helped to prop up her approval rating. Here now is a look at some of the pending issues in foreign relations.
The Park Geun-hye administration has seen some notable achievements on the diplomatic front over the past 3 years. By attending China's Victory Day parade as South Korea's head of state, the president was able to further strengthen political and economic ties with Beijing. Korea also saw the resumption of talks with Japan and China, which had ground to a near halt following disputes over shared history and issues of national security. The trilateral meeting, which took place for the first time in 3.5 years, signaled the restoration of three-way cooperation. Seoul and Tokyo were also able to reach a landmark agreement on the issue of wartime sexual slavery. But in terms of inter-Korean relations, following a surprise nuclear test from North Korea and another long-range rocket launch, the mood on the peninsula quickly soured. The recent provocations have led to formal talks between Seoul and Washington on the deployment of a U.S. missile defense system, THAAD. Meanwhile, shortly after the North's rocket launch, the UN Security Council issued a statement condemning the act, and the international community has stepped up efforts to place greater pressure on Pyongyang. Developments following provocations from the North have triggered a broader change in dynamics in the region, creating a greater need for prudence from Seoul and a smart act of balance.
Now, Dr. Bong, the Korea-Japan deal on wartime sexual slavery and President Park's attendance at China's Victory Day parade are some headlines that we remember from the past year. What do you say are some of her notable achievements?
Some of the notable achievements of Park Geun-hye administration's foreign policy for the past 3 years can be summarized as very bold initiatives, very ambitious goals, despite the fact that the administration has not fulfilled the entire agendas as it originally wished. The administration embarked upon with a very ambitious goals and big slogans such as NAPSI, Northeast Asian Peace and Cooperation Initiatives, and Korean Peninsula Trust Process with North Korea, and the Eurasian process to develop the North Korean and the Russian regions. All these visions were once pursued by previous administrations, but never reached the actual outcomes. So it is a credit due to Park Geun-hye administration to revive these very difficult and challenging, but at the same time ambitious goals to the upfront of her foreign policy agendas. And the Park Geun-hye administration, compared to its predecessors, did not budge from trying to solve big issues with other countries in fundamental ways, not just trying to kick the can down the road to be potentially settled by next administration, but the administration was really determined to settle all these issues within the tenure of the current administration. And the declaration of the settlement of the wartime sex slavery with Japan could be one of the examples, despite it caused a lot of controversies. But there is no denying that the administration faced the issue upfront and straight.
Well, President Park Geun-hye has been quite busy overseas as well with what many are calling sales diplomacy. In terms of opening new economic opportunities for Korea, what kind of highlights have we seen?
Well, since her inauguration, she has paid the official visit, more than 20 times. In terms of number of countries where she has visited. Well, she visited the Asian countries, particularly China, so she could strengthen the quite strong ties, particularly economic ties with China, even though it has been threatened by the nuclear crisis made by the North Koreans. But still, we can say that she contributed to strengthen economic cooperation with China. And she also paid her official visit to USA. During her visit, maybe there was some scandal of one of his top staffs. But anyway, she could strengthen the economic ties with the USA. And then particularly, she paid her official visit to Middle East countries. She made our successful agreement for the nuclear power plant projects, and also she strengthened the economic ties with the Middle East countries, so we could expand our exports to those countries. And then also she visited to some European countries. Well, after the signing of the Korea-EU FTA, there has been some criticism about the effectiveness of the Korea-EU FTA. Well, our exports to EU member countries was rather decreased, not increased. So, but I think after her official visit, those kind of trends were a little bit adjusted, and that the contents of economic cooperation between Korea and EU was improved owing to her the official visit. Well, as you know very well, she is even planned to visit to Iran, which just finished economic sanctions imposed by the Western capitalist countries. So I think as a whole, I think the sales or diplomacy could be accessed to one of the successful one. If I want thing more, if I add it up, she used some Korean culture, costumes, and she's a woman. Lady, I think so. Those kinds of things can be regarded as one of the advantages which President Park Geun-hye has had comparing with the previous president. She gave a very soft image that is a strong leader's image to our neighboring countries as well as the allies. And then also by transferring some image, cultural image of Korean culture, I think she used those kind of cultural aspects even in the diplomacy with the countries around the world.
Well, the government is under test once again right now, though, with North Korea's provocations and THAAD deployment, as well as continued controversy over the wartime sexual slavery agreement. How can Seoul keep its relations with Beijing and Tokyo in positive territory?
These are issues that have frustrated repeated attempts by related parties for resolution. And there's a reason for that, because it's such a complicated and important issues. That is why it defied the repeated attempts by these countries for settlement. So there is no shame to be felt by Park Geun-hye administration that all the solutions it has tried so far has not borne out to be the perfect solutions. The simple answer to that is that you have to keep on trying to reach the ultimate destination, which would be satisfactory to all related parties. One reality that South Korean government has to admit, not only Park Geun-hye administration, but the leaderships before and after this administration, is that you have to ride on the dictate of geopolitics. South Korea's geopolitical conditions cannot be changed. South Korea cannot change the dictate of geopolitics, but it can ride on it, and it can choose the ways it responds to the geopolitical conditions. So it is important for South Korean government to be able to ride on the geopolitical trends, especially under the umbrella of Sino-US competition these days, and the dynamics of the competition between Japan and China. For China-US competition, the whole thing is not so pessimistic for South Korea. Some people would argue that it is an imperative for South Korea to make up its mind between China and the United States. But I think it is a very dangerous premise, given the geopolitical condition that South Korea has to live with. More appropriate choice for South Korea is to make as many friends, whether new or old. It is not for South Korea to choose between old friend in the United States and new friend in China, but the focus should be make as many friends as possible, old and new. And the basic character of Sino-US relationship is fundamentally different from the relationship between the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War, because there is a great deal of mutual independence between China and the United States as a security competitor, but at the same time as economic partners. So it is an erroneous assumption that South Korea's choice is in stark dichotomous.
How about with our old friend Washington. Since last year, we've seen a notable shift towards a stronger alliance with the U.S.
I welcome that move, both by Seoul and Washington, as a recognition by both governments to set the top priorities straight. The reason why South Korea is important, not only to the United States, but to North Korea, Japan, and China, is that it has the U.S.-ROC Security Alliance. U.S.-ROC Security Alliance, despite all the foibles and problems, it is still the best strategic asset for South Korea. In the entire national history that is running more than 5,000 years, Korea as a nation has suffered at least one major foreign invasion or occupation every 4 years. Think about it. You live in a country that suffers from massive foreign invasion as often as World Cup games. So survival should be the top priority for South Korea, despite all these clash of civilizations or economic frictions and security considerations. In that regard, you have to have a strong and working security partnership with the United States that will enhance the influence of South Korea as an independent voice in world affairs.
When you look at the reality facing us, I think the Korean policy to strengthen the relationship with the USA is more than welcome. Why? Because look at the Chinese stance toward North Korea. Well, they are against the deployment of the THAAD on the Korean Peninsula. But they did not criticize as we expected, the North Korean policy. If they do not want to see the deployment of THAAD on the Korean soil, they should persuade North Korea to give up their nuclear weapon program. But they did not. They participated to some degree in that global efforts to change North Korean policy, but not as much as we expected. So considering these kind of things, to make Chinese government change to the direction where we expected, definitely we should use the relationship with the USA. By strengthening the cooperation with the USA, we can draw the change of the Chinese government policy toward North Korea.
Right. As we are discussing this matter, both government in Beijing and Seoul have been trying to patch up the controversy generated by the very provocative remark by a Chinese ambassador to Korea when he met with the opposition party leader, that because of the deployment of U.S. THAAD to Korea, the whole spectrum of Sino-Korean relationship may be evaporated overnight.
It's a threat, isn't it? Yeah.
But that's a very provocative remark, and sometimes for some people it's very offensive and out of line. But at the same time, it will provide South Korean government and its people a very good litmus test,
right.
A window of opportunity to actually gauge how fundamental and deep, or conversely, how shallow nature of the Sino-Korea partnership really is. If China is not a friend in need, then China cannot be a good friend indeed. This is a very uncomfortable recognition, but extremely necessary for South Korea to forge into a more workable partnership with its neighboring countries, including China.
So I want to give them one of the old sayings. As you reap, as you sow. I think it will take a time, but China should change or make it clear their stance first. Then we can strengthen and deepen our relationship with China, I think.
Well, this topic keeps coming up repeatedly, but one key issue in foreign relations is North Korea. Seoul has made a conscious shift away from its existing approach. It seems ready to play a different game with the North this time. But public opinion remains divided. While almost 48% are in support of a more hardline policy, some 43% are calling for continued dialogue and cooperation. Which side are you on, Professor Shin?
Well, in fact, I gave a score, support to the Korean government decision, which means that over the last decades, we have, means the previous governments have made every effort to strengthen the relationship or cooperative relationship with North Korea. What kind of outcome we have? In fact, North Korea has nuclear program, while we don't have. because of nuclear weapons program which North Korean government has, we are exposed to the direct threats. Then who will be able to help us? No one else. Besides, extremely speaking, we can cooperate with the USA. So I think it's very difficult to answer in a black and white argument way, but if you ask me yes or no, I think it was not a successful policy. So the next question we have to find an answer is, what can we do? I think that at least we have to show our clear message to North Korea. We will not be sitting idle anymore. Towards some actions or measures taken by North Korean government. Otherwise, the situation will be continued for a while without having a clear answer to the question.
Dr. Bong, are you in support of a more hardline policy as well?
Well, listening to Professor Shin's very thoughtful remark, I feel like more opportunistic. I believe that we need both hardline policy and engagement policy. You are dealing with North Korea and its nuclear and missile program, so you got to mobilize everything you have and more. So it's not a dichotomy between choosing hardline policy or choosing engagement policy, but we got to have a right mix and match with both the policies, so that we will have an optimal and most effective policy dealing with North Korean threat. Well, we have to build our capability to hit North Korea up and down, left and right, and in the middle. So engagement policy should be part of the entire spectrum of our policy choices.
Yes.
Think about it. The reason why the hardline policy chosen by Park Geun-hye administration being effective is that the previous engagement policy, terms as a sunshine policy, actually created changes inside North Korea, whether it was original intention or not. But now North Korea has something to lose, so that it increased the influence of South Korean government to dictate the terms of engagement with North Korea. Otherwise, then just the unilateral and consistent hardline policy would not have generated as effective outcomes as it did recently. So you got to have both. You got to keep North Korea on its toes and keep on your influence maximized.
Well, for now, pessimists are saying this is the end of inter-Korean relations. But Professor Shin, do you see a window of opportunity emerging out of this deadlock?
Yes. Well, in fact, I fully agree with Dr. Bong's opinion about the previous question. So if I add something more, actually, at the moment, I think the hardline policy chosen by the Korean government is okay. But what I mean is not the hardline policy should be continued for forever. We said we are very familiar with some expression that politics is a living animal, right? I think diplomacy is also living animal. When the situation changed, we have to change our stance. So I think at the moment, this is a high time to show our strong message to North Korea. If you do not change your policy, we will not be any more cooperative to you. It is very clear message. And then look at the situation we have. Look at the efforts made by the Korean government. We are cooperating very actively with the USA and Japan and UN member countries. Why? We want to change North Korean policy. So if they change, why not? We will have another opportunity to restore the relations with North Korea. There will be more chances. But totally, it will be depending on the North Korean policy.
No doubt this shift in Seoul's North Korea policy is affecting broader relations in the region. Now, the government has said the North Korean nuclear issue will be its top priority this year. What kind of follow-up measures do we need?
I would highlight two. One is to focus on short-term deterrence and defense in case North Korea would engage a provocative action, especially during the time when Seoul and Washington engage in the annual joint military exercises. This is high time for potential clash between the two Koreas. The second thing is to review the entire roadmap leading to ultimate denuclearization of North Korea by Washington, Tokyo, and Seoul. With the December agreement to have settled the wartime sex slavery issue with Japan, Seoul and Tokyo now has created an effective platform to launch higher level of security cooperation to cope with common security threat. So Washington, Tokyo, and Seoul may precipitate the speed of a joint military cooperation, taking advantage of the sense of a crisis created after North Korea's provocations. And another point in terms of domestic politics is to assuage the grievances of the corporations who lost a lot of their fortunes inside Kaesong Industrial Complex. Otherwise, then they would trigger so-called South against the South internal dispute and division, which will make the South Korean government very vulnerable to the psychological campaign waged by North Korea as a government just disregarding the welfare and wishes of common people in South Korea.
As President Park Geun-hye wrapped up her first 3 years in office, we discussed the economy, diplomacy, and North Korea policy. What do you personally hope to see accomplished in the next 2 years?
I hope the President Park Geun-hye could successfully revitalize the depressed economy. Very recently, Korean government announced the so-called economic revitalization program. So they are planned to invest about $40 billion to revitalize the Korean economy. I think the revitalization of the Korean economy can be the first step to solve many issues, many difficulties facing us. So I personally wish to see the restoration of the Korean the economy, which can have enough competitive in global market.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is very closely related to the lives of the ordinary people,
Yes.
isn't it, right?
Well, Park Geun-hye administration should not feel so pressed with time. People are saying that it's already having lame duck syndrome. Its term is only left with 2 years. Guess what? 2 years out of 5 is 40%. It's half, minus 10%, which is sufficient amount of time for any leadership to recover the past mistakes and losses. So being optimistic and patient with regard to what you can achieve for the remaining tenure of presidency should be the guiding principle for the Park Geun-hye administration.
So as she embarks on the remaining 2 years of her term, what do you think will be the most pressing issue for her?
The most pressing issue to prevent things from getting worse with regard to North Korean nuclear program, because trend is getting advantageous to South Korea because the international society, including United States, China, and Japan, are now fundamentally serious about tackling the North Korean nuclear capability and threat. So focus is there, so South Korea can be a very influential player in mobilizing international effort to tackle the issue.
Professor Shin?
Well, I think we will face some very different circumstances, particularly in terms of the diplomacy. You know, we are right now playing the game with the China and USA. Those kind of the circumstances will keeping on for a while. So in such a kind of new environment, we have to maximize our national economic interest and political interest. Well, how is going to be a big question, but certainly the Park Geun-hye government should make every effort to maximize economic as well as political benefits in such a kind of very different circumstances, I think.
So as we wrap up our discussion today, any final thoughts you'd like to share or any message you'd like to convey to the administration out there?
I wish you good luck on the President Park Geun-hye. Personally, I think she is one of the good leaders among we have had so far. So even though we will face more difficulties, but I propose to everyone, please, not criticize. Rather we have to support her. I think to produce more fruitful outcomes in the next 2 years. That will be more beneficial, and that will be more practical steps we have to take to maximize our satisfaction in our future life, I think.
Communication with the public is the area for improvement for Park Geun-hye administration for the next 2 years. It seems like Park Geun-hye administration has been too busy leading the country without actually properly explaining the reasons why the public needs to make certain sacrifices to support the government decisions. But without public support, any leadership cannot sustain its effort to realize the national interest in the long run. So be patient, engage with the public, and maintain the long-term perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bong and Professor Shin, for sharing your insights with us today. And that is all for this edition of News Inside. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with more next week.